I took the job at the Bleeding Oak because I was desperate. I just moved to this small village after a string of bad luck in the city, and I needed steady work. The pub wasn't much to look at: old stone walls, crooked beams, and a bar worn smooth by generations of drinkers, but it had character. Mrs. Leary, the owner, was kind enough, and she gave me a place to stay in one of the rooms upstairs. On my first day, she gave me a tour of the place, ending with the cellar. "This is where you'll be changing barrels when the taps go dry," she said, heaving open a heavy wooden door near the back of the pub. The door creaked like it hadn't been oiled in years, and she gestured for me to follow her down the steps. The cellar was cold. Damp. The kind of cold that clung to your bones. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, casting weak, yellow light across the stone walls. Rows of barrels lined the far side, and the air smelled faintly of mildew and stale beer. I couldn't explain it, but I felt uneasy down there, like the shadows were watching me from the corners. Mrs. Leary noticed my discomfort and gave a small, knowing smile. "It's just a cellar, Tom. Nothing to worry about." She paused a beat too long before adding, almost as an afterthought, "But you might hear things now and then. The place is old, lots of creaks and groans." I nodded, trying to shake off the unease. "It's just an old building settling," I told myself. Cellars always have a certain atmosphere. That night, I changed my first barrel. It wasn't complicated: roll the empty one aside, connect the new one to the taps. But the cellar felt colder than before. The light bulb flickered as I worked, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, convinced I wasn't alone. By the time I finished, my nerves were frayed. I bolted up the stairs and slammed the door shut behind me. Over the next week, the regulars told stories about the pub's resident ghost. His name was Jack, a drifter who'd worked there decades ago. No one knew how he died, but the tales were always the same: Jack haunted the cellar. "Used to be a barman, or maybe a brewer," one patron said, nursing his pint. "Went down to the cellar one night and never came back. Now he scares the hell out of anyone who lingers too long." "Rubbish," another snapped. "It's just an old pub. Things creak. People imagine things." I tried to ignore it. Ghosts aren't real, I told myself. But the next few nights chipped away at my certainty. It started with footsteps, soft echoes behind me when no one was there. The air grew colder with each visit. My hands shook as I worked. Then came the whispers. Faint. Garbled, like someone muttering just out of earshot. One night, crouched by a barrel, I heard breathing close behind me. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. Silence. I stood, the hair on my neck rising. The light bulb flickered once, twice, and died. Darkness swallowed the cellar. I fumbled for my phone, my pulse roaring. The flashlight beam caught movement, something tall and pale, slinking behind the barrels. I didn't wait. I fled up the stairs, slamming the door behind me. Mrs. Leary found me later, shaking behind the bar. "Jack's been restless lately," she said, her voice low. "He stays in the cellar, usually. But if the lights go out," she trailed off, leaving the thread hanging. "Wander?" I repeated, horrified. She nodded. "Finish quickly. Lock the cellar at night. He doesn't like lingering." The final night was a Friday. The pub was packed. Then, the power died. Darkness fell. The air thickened, suffocating. "Tom, check the cellar," Mrs. Leary ordered. I didn't want to, but I couldn't refuse. The cellar door stood open, though I'd locked it. The stairs groaned as I descended, flashlight trembling. Cold gnawed at me. Silence pressed in, a living thing. Then, footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Echoing off the stones. I swung the light, shadows danced. "Who's there?" I whispered. The footsteps stopped. A figure stepped into the beam, tall. Gaunt. Hollow eyes. A twisted grin. His skin gray and rotting. He stared, unblinking, through me. I stumbled back. The flashlight clattered, "Stay away." I screamed. I scrambled up the stairs, his footsteps pounding behind me heavy. Relentless. I slammed the door, locked it, and fled. I never went back. They say Jack's grown bolder. He doesn't stay in the cellar anymore. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see him. Those hollow eyes. And I wonder how close did he come to dragging me into the dark.